Okay, so the recording is in progress. Yes. So let's see what is a disaster. So what is the definition of a disaster? So we call that, a serious disruption of the function of a community or a society at any scale due to any hazardous event, interacting with the condition of exposure, vulnerability, and the capacity, leading to one or the following. It might be a human loss, it might be an economic loss, it might be loss to the environmental, it might be other impacts as well. So any event that is started from a hazardous event that have an impact on human, on material, on economy, on economic and other costs, it called a disaster. And again, a disaster will only occur if a natural disaster, natural hazard or man-made hazard impact upon a vulnerable community, okay, who are exposed to the hazard. So there are lots of some difficult words like the vulnerability, hazard, exposure. So we'll talk about later as well. So obviously, just to give you an example, any natural event that happened far in an area that there is no human population, there is no built in infrastructure, there is no infrastructure or anything. If anything happened there, for example, an earthquake or volcanic eruption, there might be no loss. It might be a regular natural event, but we cannot say this is a disaster because there is no loss, there is no impact on human, there is no impact on the economy, there is no impact on environmental losses. So we might not call it a disaster. We might call it just an annual, just a natural event. So we can categorize disaster into two major types. One is a natural, so a disaster that is caused by the natural hazard, and other we can call it man-made. So among the natural disaster, we can call it that all those earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, floods, and fires. And among the man-made, so all those war, pollution, and nuclear explosion, and some fire, so intended fires, some from the chemical disasters or oil spill exposures, and then explosion, and some more the transportation disaster. So these are the major categories. One that is causing by the natural events that can result into the disaster, and some other are from the man-made. So these are the two examples. One, we might say that Cyclone Gabriel, and another one, the largest one might be the 9/11 New York attack. If we categorize further into the natural disaster, the natural disaster might be categorized into some more broader types as well. So there might be some geophysical, some hydrological, some meteorological, and then again climatological and biological, and there are so many types. So mainly what we see are some of the floods that are more hydrological, and again some landslides and wave action, and some more other types are from earthquake. There are more geophysical, and there are slow onset disasters are called the drought because it is not happening all of a sudden, just like an earthquake. It is slowly happening, and the range of the floods is sometime in the decade, sometime 4 or 5 years as well. And then again, a glacial lake outburst, it is again slow because, for example, on a river, there is a mountain because of earthquake just dropped, and it can block the stream, or it can block the small river. All that lake can be formed, and suddenly, or with the passage of time, that lake can outburst as well. So these are all different types of natural disaster that we can categorize into different forms. And again, if we talk about the man-made disaster, or that when the human intervention can cause a disaster, or the war and terrorism, we can see that all that civil war in Syria and the civil war in Lebanon in 90s, it caused a huge disaster. Then again, some environmental disaster, oil spills, BP oil spill, the famous one. Some industrial disaster, the chemical and the nuclear. The one was Bhopal industrial crashes in India, and Chernobyl crashes were also called an industrial. That's also both of the man-made. And again, the transportation disaster is also categorized into the man-made disaster. There are similarities as well. If we talk about the similarities first, both result into the casualties and also in economic losses, and both require a response and the recovery and rehabilitation and other phases as well. But there are some differences as well. So the natural disaster, as we discussed earlier, is caused by the natural event, and again, human intervention. And sometimes the natural disaster are sudden and also slow onset as well. Slow onset example we already I mentioned are the droughts, and the man-made disaster. We can say the dysfunction of a human-engineered system. It might be intentional or it might be unintentional. So whatever the human have created a function, it might fail to function. Okay, so it might create another disaster, or it might create a domino effect that can lead to a multiple other disasters as well. And we have seen those natural disasters are across the boundaries. So the disaster that 2005 Kashmir earthquake that happened in 3 countries, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in India. So natural disaster doesn't believe any nation boundaries. Most of the time it goes beyond the boundaries of any nation. But we have seen that man-made disaster, somehow it is limited to some example, they are limited to a certain region, certain city, or maybe certain country as well. And yes, natural disasters, again, we cannot control nature. Okay, but man-made disaster can be prevented at the first place from happening. And again, it can can be impacted by the human activity, natural disaster, or it can be exacerbated by the human activity. So in natural event that is happening, but the human activities can exacerbate the whole disaster. We have seen all those slash that is coming, the natural event, then again human activity or the forestry. So it exacerbated all that, the damages and losses. And on the other hand side, the human man-made disaster can be amplified by the natural forces as well. So a dysfunctional thing, and then amplified by the natural disaster as well. So some example: Canterbury earthquake, Haiti, Kashmir earthquake, and some for the man-made or humanly induced disaster are 9/11, Rwanda genocide, around 500,000 people were killed, Syrian civil war, and Bhopal and Chernobyl disasters.